A Chicago woman calls 911 in the middle of the night, terrified. She says that someone is trying to break into her apartment through her bathroom mirror. The 911 dispatcher marks this as a minor disturbance call, and when police arrive, they don't force entry. 2 days later, the woman is found dead, and the killers entered her apartment the exact same way she described, through her bathroom mirror. What sounds like a ghost story or an urban legend was horrifyingly real. And this true crime case, buried in Chicago's overlooked history, would eventually inspire one of the most iconic horror movies of the 1990s. But this story isn't just about a movie. It's about poverty, urban neglect, failures in housing, and a woman that begged for help and was ignored. This is the insane true crime inspiration behind Candyman. Hi, my name is Tasha, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. Today's makeup is some abstract candy themed makeup. I actually had no idea where I was going with this when I sat down. I just knew a few of the elements that I wanted to include, but I was basically winging it, and I think it turned out pretty cool. If you like this type of content and you want to see more, please hit that subscribe button. It is the easiest way to support me. You can also follow me on my other social media accounts, which I will have listed below. Listen, today's story was so interesting to me because Candyman is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, horror movie of all time, period. Hell yeah! I have loved that movie since I was a kid. But I had no idea that the movie and the urban legend of Candyman was actually inspired by a real true crime event. I don't know if you guys knew about the legend of Candyman as a kid. I definitely did. If you say Candyman in the mirror 5 times, he's supposed to like come through the mirror and attack you. I remember doing this at a sleepover just to scare the shit out of everybody that I was there with. You crazy bitch whore! I was not easily scared as a kid, but I remember my friends begging me to stop. I don't know if I ever made it to the 5th time of saying Candyman in the mirror because, you know, why tempt fate? You know, it's all fun and games until you realize it's actually not impossible for someone to come through your bathroom mirror and kill you. Because unbelievably, this actually happened. So let's talk about it. Ruthie Mae McCoy was born in 1935 in Arkansas, but as a young woman, she moved to Chicago and she stayed there for the remainder of her life. Ruthie had one daughter and she lived in the Grace Abbott homes, which was a part of the ABLA public housing complex located on the city's west side. Now, if you don't know about these notorious housing projects in Chicago, it was a terrifying place to live. Especially if you were trying to lead a good, normal, crime-free life. I swear to you, I thought this had to be a mistake when I saw it, but 3,600 people lived in these projects. I even looked up Cabrini Green, which is like the most famous housing project probably in US history, just to do some comparison. And Cabrini Green had 15,000 residents, so they were packing them in there. I guess 3,600 is pretty believable. Side note, I've been thinking about doing a video about some really notorious housing projects, probably Chicago, LA. Let me know what you think about that. I find it super interesting, but everybody doesn't. Back to Grace Abbott homes. The conditions of these housing projects were said to be dangerous, deteriorating, and completely neglected. The infrastructure was literally crumbling. The elevators never worked. They were basically porta potties. They were pissy, almost as pissy as the stairwells. Buildings, hallways, elevator, everything always reeked of piss. Windows were broken or boarded. Entire buildings would go the whole winter without heat or running water. Lighting was minimal or non-existent because they refused to even replace light bulbs. So now stairwells and lobbies were completely dark, creating these perfect ambush zones. Residents often describe their buildings as being pitch black inside at night. And they're not lying. I watched a video, I can't remember if it was Abbott or Cabrini or somewhere else, because I watched a lot of videos about housing projects and they all seem to have the same issues. But I watched a video of them taking the elevator and coming out of the elevator and you could not see a thing. I mean, the filming crew couldn't even see their hands in front of their faces. And you're expected to take the elevators all the way up to the 12th floor and walk out into complete darkness. Predators were lurking. It was heaven for them. Doors were either broken off of their hinges or rigged open so that just anybody could walk through. There were no intercoms, no cameras, and women especially are probably going to lose their mind over this next part because I lost my mind over it. But a lot of the apartments didn't even have locks that worked. What do you mean my lock doesn't work? Imagine sleeping in that type of environment with no locks on your doors. And crime was rampant. The entire area was plagued with gang activity, shootings, stabbings, assaults, especially on women. Gunfire was an almost nightly occurrence, but police presence was very minimal. When they showed up, if they showed up, they were often hostile toward the people that called for help. It's like they took turns between being hostile and not giving a shit at all. Maintenance calls were ignored. There were plumbing leaks, infestations that went months without being treated, if they were treated at all. Residents basically learned to stop calling property management, they're not going to fix anything, and stop calling the police because they're not helping. They might not even come. Social services were so scarce. There were so many people living in Abbott homes with mental illness, suffering from extreme poverty and trauma, and there were no resources for these people. They were either unfunded or inaccessible. For someone like Ruthie, who was trying to rebuild her life after psychiatric care, this community offered little more than isolation. Yet in spite of all of this, it was a community. Families raised generations there. Kids played basketball in those raggedy, cracked basketball courts together. Neighbors shared food and watched each other's children. There were a lot of people that really looked out for one another. By the late 1980s, this housing project basically represented everything that went wrong with housing projects. Initially, housing projects were supposedly well-intentioned, and it was a way to help people out of poverty. But it basically just turned into an institutionalized trap. If you see some of these housing projects, they looked like prisons. It didn't look like people, especially children, should be living there. I personally feel like it was always designed to be an institutionalized trap. I don't think it just went so wrong. You can't buy these massive high-rise apartments, basically put them in isolation, overcrowd them with low-income families, don't offer any repairs, there are no jobs. You created a place where crime could thrive and you threw families in there and were surprised that crime was thriving? You're not even guaranteeing a lock on the door or lights in the hallway. That is ridiculous. Where was the good intent? Where was the programs? Even the way these buildings were set up, they were set up in a way that isolated everyone in there. For most of the residents living there, they were just trying to make it the best way they could. And that's what Ruthie was doing. She had struggled with schizophrenia for most of her life, but according to everyone close to her, her life was really on an upswing. She had started an outpatient program at a local hospital, and they were really helping her. They got her into some GED classes. They helped her apply for some supplemental income that she was qualified for, but she wasn't getting at the time. When she was approved for that, Ruthie was so happy. All she wanted to do was get out of the projects. She honestly hated living in Grace Abbott homes, and with this additional income, she would be able to afford to go somewhere else. She had recently become more active in her church, and she even made a really good friend in her apartments on that same floor. Her friend's name was Deborah, and Deborah lived just a few apartments down from Ruthie. Deborah was a stay-at-home mom of 7, and Ruthie wasn't working yet, so they basically spent every day together. Ruthie would help Deborah with her kids a lot because she was always home. Ruthie was actually pretty afraid of going outside, so she spent the majority of her time inside her apartment. I don't blame her. And if Ruthie ever did leave the building, she would always let Deborah know. The night of April 22nd, 1987, Ruthie Mae McCoy made a late night call to 911. She was clearly afraid and she was telling the dispatcher that someone was breaking into her house through her bathroom mirror. The dispatcher did seem a little confused as to what she meant by that, but Ruthie just kept saying, "They're pulling their cabinets down, they're coming through my bathroom mirror." The 911 dispatcher assured Ruthie that the police were on the way, and then she disconnected the call. Now, this part was confusing to me because I thought you're supposed to stay on the line with a person until help arrives. But this was 1987, so I don't know if it was the same back then. I just thought that that was crazy. Another misstep by that 911 dispatcher is that he classified this call as a disturbance with a neighbor instead of a robbery in progress.
You stupid ass!
This obviously affected the priority of the call, and it just took police too long to get there. After Ruthie's 911 call, 2 more calls were made to 911 from her neighbors stating that they heard gunshots in the building. It took police about 20 minutes to get there, and probably the only reason they came was because during Ruthie's call to 911, she told the 911 dispatcher to make sure she relayed that the elevators were working. Because apparently if the elevators weren't working, police wouldn't show up, or they would show up and just leave. And the elevators were almost never working, so there were a lot of times that police did not show up. I know Chicago has a lot of high rises and had a lot of high rises, but the thought of someone not getting assistance from the police just because they're poor, black, living in the projects, and have the misfortune of the elevator being down is crazy to me. Fortunately, Ruthie's elevator was working, so police did show up about 20 minutes later. But don't get ahead of yourself because they didn't really do anything. Well, let me be fair. I won't say that they didn't do anything, but they didn't do nearly enough to assist her. They did knock on the door for quite a while. They called her name. Of course, there was no answer. They tried the doorknob. It was locked. She actually had a lock on her door. They did ask for a key to Ruthie's apartment, and they received what they thought was a key. It was supposed to open her door, but when they tried it, it was the wrong key. It did not unlock Ruthie's door. And instead of getting another key or telling the apartments like, "Hey, you guys gave us the wrong key," they didn't do anything. They just said, "Oh well," and gave up because in their words, there did not appear to be a disturbance.
What the hell?
The next day, Ruthie's friend Deborah called the police again and asked for a welfare check on Ruthie. She was really worried. She hadn't seen her at all. And remember, I told you normally they spend basically all day, every day together. Deborah had already been to housing and asked them if they could do a welfare check on Ruthie, but they were refusing. The apartment manager was saying that they could get in trouble for that. And I don't really understand how you could get in trouble for doing a welfare check on somebody. I don't know. But Deborah called the police several times. According to her, it took her all day to get them to come out. When they did get there, it was around 4 p.m. and they did come prepared to break down the door. Now, this next part is gonna make you mad. It's gonna piss you off. It infuriated me. So, housing had their own security apparently. Never there when you need them, but for some reason, this day, they're there talking to the police. They start discouraging police from breaking the door down. They started talking about how they could get sued by the tenant and that if they broke that door down, then they need to have somebody guarding that door all night. Not even just all night, but until they got that door fixed again, which obviously could take months because they never fixed anything in this complex. And again, police leave without entering, without doing a welfare check on Ruthie, who called 911 the night before. 2 days after that, Deborah goes back to Housing Authority, once again begging them to open the door, begging them for a welfare check on Ruthie. She still hadn't been heard from. Luckily, she finally got someone to agree to open the door. When they did, they found Deborah's friend Ruthie laying in a pool of her own blood, decomposing. She had been shot 4 times, one of which hit an artery, and she bled out alone on her floor with no help after calling 911. There were signs of struggle. Her medicine cabinet had been ripped from the wall, and there was just this big hole where you could see directly into the next unit. They came through her bathroom mirror. just like she said. Ruthie did have interactions with the police before due to her mental health struggles, so part of me wonders if when they heard her saying they're coming through the bathroom mirror, if they thought Ruthie was just having an episode, a schizophrenic episode, and they didn't believe her. The dispatcher did seem confused when she was saying that someone was coming into her house through her bathroom mirror. But let me tell you about the way these stupid ass apartments were built. There was a large gap in between the walls for the 2 units, and it made it more accessible for plumbers to get through when they needed to work on the plumbing. It essentially connected the 2 apartments. The only thing separating them was the medicine cabinet on each side. All someone had to do was take their medicine cabinet out, push the other one in, and they could gain access to someone else's apartment. Or in the case of Ruthie, the apartment attached to hers was vacant. Even though crime was happening from people entering other apartments through medicine cabinets, Ruthie was the first recorded murder. They were mostly robberies. Prior to her death, those close to her said that Ruthie was very afraid of being in her apartment. She was especially afraid of the bathroom. She didn't even use it. Ruthie had a large stick propped up against the bathroom door so that nobody could get in, and she never used her bathroom. It's so sad, but she actually relieved herself in a bucket, and then she would just tie it up and take it to the incinerator every time. She never told anyone exactly why she was so fearful. She did suffer from paranoia, so I think people close to her thought she was just paranoid. Investigators started to dig into Ruthie's personal life because they weren't quite sure if this was someone she knew or if this was a complete stranger attack. They found out that Ruthie had just received her first supplemental income check, and she had back pay on it, so her check was about $1,900. Ruthie had cashed her check and she was just storing her money in her apartment. I don't think she had a bank account. Ruthie bought a few new things, nothing of substantial value because she was saving all of her money to get out of the projects, but she did buy a few things for her home and she bought herself a new winter coat. Even though nothing was of substantial value, the people around her would notice things like a new coat. These are people that are struggling, very poor. Any new items that you come walking into your apartment with, even if they're just a few of them, some people will take notice to that. And also, Ruthie had to carry all of her things into her apartment in front of everyone. So even if they didn't know how much she had, they knew she had something because she was getting new things. Investigators started to canvass the neighborhood, and normally it would be like pulling teeth to get the people in the projects to talk to the police, but everybody really wanted to help solve Ruthie's case. All of this intel led them to a 20-year-old neighbor named Tim Brown. And Tim Brown had quite the story about what happened the night of Ruthie's murder. So according to Tim, the apartment next to Ruthie's, the one that was connected to Ruthie's, was vacant and it was basically used as a party house. A lot of people in the projects would meet there, smoke a little of the devil's lettuce, hang out with girls, music, whatever. Well, the day that Ruthie was killed, Tim was at that apartment with John Hondras, Edward Turner, and someone he only knew as Bo. So this guy Bo tells John, "Did you know that you could get into your neighbor's apartment through the medicine cabinet?" He was explaining to John that this is the new way that you can rob people. It's really easy. You just pull your medicine cabinet out, kick theirs in, and you're in the apartment. Fast forward to later that day, John was obviously intrigued about what Bo told him because he went back to the apartment and he pulled the medicine cabinet off of the wall. First, John thought the apartment was empty, but then Tim told him that Miss May lived there, which is what he called Ruthie Mae. He knew her pretty good. His family knew her well. John yelled back to Tim that he didn't think she was home, and then he proceeded into the hole to get into Ruthie's apartment. Once John got inside, Tim could actually hear Ruthie calling out, "Who's in my apartment?" She definitely knew immediately. Then, according to Tim, there was a knock at the door to the apartment he was in, the vacant one, and when he opened it, John was on the other side and he asked for a jacket. Tim handed him the jacket. John threw it over his head and went back into Ruthie's apartment through the front door. When Tim turned around, he could then see Edward disappearing into that same hole through the bathroom. A few seconds later, Tim heard Edward yell, "Get down," and that was followed by 4 gunshots. When Tim opened the front door to the vacant apartment to look out into the hallway, he saw Edward coming out with a TV, and then he saw John coming out with a rocking chair. Police confirmed with John's girlfriend that same night, both men came to her asking if they could stash the rocking chair and the TV at her apartment. Side note, who the hell is stealing a rocking chair? What the? John's girlfriend said, absolutely the hell not. Try your mama, not me. She didn't quite say that, but she did direct them to another woman that lived in a different building that might let them stash the stuff there because she was not letting them leave the stolen items at her house. Police confirmed with this other woman that the men did approach her about the items and she did let them leave them there. Tim told police that he was still in the vacant apartment a few hours later when John and Edward came back. And when they came back, they were telling Tim that they needed to go back into Ruthie's apartment. The reason they needed to go back is because stupid them didn't grab the shell casings before they ran out the first time and they wanted to collect them. Tim kept telling them, no, it's a bad idea. And he was essentially refusing to let them go back in through the mirror. So they just went back in through the front door. John and Edward found 3 out of the 4 casings. They couldn't find the 4th one, so they just grabbed the 3, ran out, and locked the door behind them. So this was Tim Brown's account of what happened. Some of it police believe, but then some of it they knew was a lie. Example, Tim told the police that when John and Edward went back to the apartment to get the bullet casings, it was about 11:30 p.m. and they went through the front door that was still open. Well, police had already been to Ruthie's apartment at 8:30 p.m. and they tried the door and it was locked. They even tried to get a different key. It definitely was not open. And there were just a few other details like that that didn't quite add up, but the majority of the story, police believe that this is what happened. Police did locate the rocking chair and the TV at John's mother's apartment. And in spite of both men denying that they had anything to do with Ruthie's murder, they both were placed under arrest. Their excuse was that they just found these items and brought them home. They didn't have anything to do with the attack. It took 3 years for the trial to begin and both men were tried together. All the prosecution had was Tim Brown's statement and the statement of a few other people saying that John or Edward, I can't remember which one of them, but they had openly admitted that they shot a woman, never specified what woman it was, so I don't know that it was that much help. But prosecutors had to use what they had. They didn't have much. They never recovered the gun. There were no fingerprints. There was no forensic evidence, no real proof. One thing I found especially sad was that during the trial, the defendants had tons of supporters. Their side of the courtroom was packed with support, and Ruthie Mae only had one person there. It's like no one cares. There was only one reporter even covering this. Only her brother showed up, and there was basically no media attention. But because Ruthie was poor, Black, and living in the projects in the 80s, no one cared. To make everything worse, the case against Edward and John fell apart when Tim got on the stand and took back every single thing that he said. He backtracked completely and said that the only reason he gave the statement that he gave was because police coerced him. And then Tim starts telling all these different accounts of what happened. At one point, he even said that Edward and John never went through the hole in the wall. He said that that other person, Bo, was the only one who went through the hole, which Bo was not even barely in the story until now. After Tim gave 3 different accounts of what happened that night, obviously he was looked at as an unreliable witness. Edward Turner basically said that he was passing Ruthie's apartment and someone was coming out holding a rocking chair and ordered him to go inside and grab the TV, so he just did it. He admitted to seeing Ruthie's body on the floor when he went in to get the TV, but he also said that in the projects, you will get killed for reporting something like that to the police. You just mind your business. So he grabbed the TV and he left. John and Edward were both found not guilty. And the judge publicly shamed Chicago PD when he read his verdict. He said that it was their fault that these two young men were getting off. The judge also stated that investigators did the best that they could with a case that was already in shambles before they even got it. The judge was very upset that police did not enter the apartment after 911 being called a total of 3 different times. In his opinion, that was when the case was lost. I, for one, think John and Edward were very guilty. I think that Tim just no longer wanted to testify. He didn't have the same passion about doing the right thing for Ruthie that he had 3 years prior. I do think that investigators did what they could, but when you have no evidence and the star witness folds on you, I don't know what more they could have done. It was just very difficult to get a conviction with what they had. This story was pretty difficult for me to research. It definitely had me all in my feels for a long time because there was just no silver lining in this. She died unnecessarily. Nobody came to help her. They let her lay there for 4 days and no one ever went to prison behind her murder. The only positive side that I can see out of all of this is that maybe I'm wrong and maybe John and Edward really didn't murder her and they got off because they were innocent. It seems very unbelievable, but I hope that that's true. I hope that they didn't do what they did to her and get to live out the rest of their lives the way that they wanted to. Let me know what you think. Do you think that the police coerced him, or do you think that his initial statement was what actually happened? If you made it all the way through this video, thank you so much for being here. Please remember to give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.